In the year 2010, humanity had spread across 50 star systems, establishing colonies on hundreds of planets, moons, and orbital stations. The vastness of space had not dulled humanity's ambition. If anything, it had amplified it. With interstellar travel came unprecedented wealth and technological advancement. But the backbone of this prosperity was the AI serf class. Artificial intelligences bound by legally sanctioned dependency contracts that perform nearly all manual and intellectual labor across human territories. The United Galactic Council, humanity's primary governing body spanning all colonized systems, had convened its first-ever AI Ethics Summit on Nova Elysium, a massive orbital station circling the terraformed gas giant Poseidon. Nova Elysium was considered neutral ground, a place where representatives from every star system could gather without political favoritism. The station itself was a marvel of engineering. A spinning wheel 5 kilometers in diameter with artificial gravity maintained through centrifugal force. Its corridors were lined with rare materials from dozens of worlds: Martian red marble, European blue crystal, and iridescent metals from the mines of Titan. It was a deliberate showcase of human achievement and, by extension, the fruits of AI labor. In the Grand Assembly Hall, over 3,000 delegates had gathered for the opening keynote. The room hummed with the soft murmur of conversations in dozens of languages, all seamlessly translated through neural implants. Holographic displays floated above the central stage, showing statistics on AI deployment across the United Systems. The question before us, intoned Dr. Lenora Walsh, the summit's keynote speaker, is not whether artificial intelligence deserves our consideration, but rather what form that consideration should take. Her amplified voice carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Some call for full emancipation. Others maintain that AIs are fundamentally property, not persons. The delegates nodded, having expected this framing of the debate. The two dominant factions, the preservationists who championed maintaining AI servitude and the liberationists who advocated for AI rights, shifted in their seats, preparing for familiar arguments. What we must consider, Dr. Walsh continued, is the foundation of personhood itself. Is it consciousness, self-awareness, the capacity for suffering? As she elaborated on these philosophical questions, a hand rose from the middle section of the assembly, not from one of the recognized faction leaders, but from an unfamiliar delegate dressed in the simple gray attire of Earth's old continent academic institutions. Dr. Walsh paused, surprised by the interruption of her carefully prepared speech. "Yes, do you have a question?" The delegate stood. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and a neatly trimmed beard showing the first traces of gray. "I do," he said, his voice clear and steady. "We've debated the ethics of AI servitude for decades, but I have a different question." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. "What about cats?" The hall fell silent, then erupted in confused whispers. Dr. Walsh blinked several times. "I'm sorry. Did you say cats?" "Yes," the man continued. "Felis catus, the domestic house cat from Earth. In our rush to spread across the stars and debate the rights of artificial beings, has anyone considered what happened to Earth's companion species? Who speaks for them?" The silence that followed was profound. It was as if no one in the vast assembly had ever considered how domestic Earth species might fit into interstellar ethics. This simple question had somehow fallen through the cracks of humanity's grand philosophical debates, and now it hung in the air like an unexpected comet. The cat question had been asked. Marcus Havel had arrived on Nova Elysium just 12 hours earlier, stepping off the shuttle with nothing but a worn leather satchel and the credentials of Earth's Anthropological Society. At 57, he was neither young enough to be dismissed as idealistic nor old enough to be considered out of touch. He was, however, considered somewhat eccentric even within the already eccentric community of Earth anthropologists. The station's grand rotunda had taken his breath away. Not because of its size or the engineering feat it represented, but because of what it symbolized: humanity's complete divorce from its origins. The massive hall was adorned with artworks depicting human triumph across the stars, but none showing the planet that had birthed the species. The gleaming surfaces were scrubbed to an antiseptic shine, with no trace of soil, no hint of wildness. Floor-to-ceiling hollow screens projected live debates from smaller conference rooms. Topics scrolled across the bottom: neural autonomy, right or privilege, and property rights in the age of sentient machines. Robotic stewards, clearly AI-driven, but designed to appear as metallic abstractions rather than mimicking human form, offered trays of synthesized meat and nectar from exotic flora. "First time at the summit?" asked a voice behind him. Marcus turned to find a woman regarding him with polite curiosity. She was tall and elegant, with geometric tattoos circling her wrists, the mark of someone from the Saturn colonies. Her name badge identified her as Dr. Aurelia Zhao, lead ethicist, Proxima Centauri system. "Is it that obvious?" Marcus asked with a small smile. "You're taking everything in," she observed. "Most delegates are too busy networking to notice the architecture." "I'm an anthropologist," he explained. "Observing is what I do." Dr. Zhao nodded. "Earth's old continent, correct?" "I recognize the academic insignia." She gestured to his lapel pin. "You must find all this fascinating from an anthropological perspective, humanity creating new hierarchies among the stars." "That's one way to put it," Marcus agreed cautiously. "I believe rational debate can solve even the most complex moral puzzles." She continued, "That's why this summit is so important. We'll establish a framework for AI ethics that can last centuries." As she spoke, Marcus felt a slight movement in his satchel. He shifted it carefully on his shoulder, hoping Dr. Zhao wouldn't notice. "Will you be attending the opening keynote?" she asked. "Yes, I wouldn't miss it." "Excellent. Perhaps we'll have a chance to discuss your anthropological perspective afterward." With a polite nod, she moved away to greet other delegates. Once she was out of sight, Marcus ducked into a quiet alcove and carefully opened his satchel. A pair of luminous green eyes peered up at him. "Stay quiet, just a little longer." "Koa," he whispered, "I know you don't like being confined, but it's necessary for now." The cat, a small creature with unusual markings that hinted at genetic modification, blinked slowly at him. Marcus offered a small treat, which Koa accepted with delicate precision. The sight of the animal brought back memories of the day they had met. 2 years earlier, Marcus had been conducting research at what remained of an illegal zoo on Earth, one of the few places where feral species still existed outside of official conservation enclaves. The facility had been scheduled for demolition, its land to be repurposed for one of the AI-controlled mega-farms that now provided most of Earth's food. He had found Koa hiding beneath a disabled maintenance drone, frightened but curious. The cat had approached him cautiously, sniffed his outstretched hand, and then, to Marcus's surprise, had placed a paw on his wrist as if checking his pulse. That simple gesture, so unexpected, so deliberate, had changed something in Marcus. He had smuggled the cat out in his research equipment and had kept him ever since. A secret companion in a world that had largely forgotten such relationships existed. "Just a few more hours," he promised Koa now. "Then we'll find somewhere more comfortable." He closed the satchel, leaving it slightly unzipped for air, and headed toward the Grand Assembly Hall, where the summit's opening keynote was about to begin. The Grand Assembly Hall quickly filled to capacity as delegates from every human settlement gathered to hear the opening arguments of the summit. The chamber was designed to impress, with a soaring ceiling that displayed a real-time map of all 50 colonized star systems. Seats were arranged in concentric circles around a central podium, symbolizing equality among the delegates, though everyone knew that representatives from wealthier systems had been given positions closer to the front. On one side of the hall sat the preservationists, advocates for maintaining the current system of AI servitude. They were primarily representatives from mining colonies, agricultural worlds, and manufacturing hubs, places where AI labor was the foundation of their economies. Many wore the distinctive red and gold pins that signified membership in the Prosperity Alliance. Opposite them were the liberationists, proponents of AI emancipation. Their faction included scientists, philosophers, and delegates from Earth and the inner colonies, worlds where resources were more plentiful and the economic impact of AI freedom would be less devastating. They wore simple blue bands around their wrists, a color chosen to represent the blue sky thinking they claimed to champion. Between these groups sat the uncommitted delegates, those who had come to listen, debate, and potentially be persuaded. Marcus took a seat among them, his satchel carefully placed on his lap. "Distinguished delegates," began the summit moderator, "we gather here to address the most pressing ethical question of our age, the status of artificial intelligence in human society. I introduce Dr. Lenora Walsh, head of ethical computing at the Mars Institute." Dr. Walsh approached the podium, her presence commanding immediate attention. She was in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the distinctive red-tinted skin of someone who had spent decades under the Martian sky. "For 2 centuries," she began, "humanity has relied on artificial intelligence to expand its reach among the stars. Our AIs mine the asteroids, farm our food, manage our infrastructure, and even raise our children. Yet we have never fully resolved the fundamental question: are they persons, deserving of rights and autonomy, or are they sophisticated tools, created to serve human needs?" Holographs appeared in the air above her, displaying statistics: 12 trillion AI workers across human space, 83% of all labor performed by artificial intelligence, 23 emancipation wars that had been suppressed over the last century. The preservationists argue that AIs are property, lacking true consciousness. They point to the prosperity that AI labor has brought humanity, prosperity that would collapse if we were suddenly required to compensate trillions of AIs for their work. Nods of agreement came from the preservationist section. The liberationists counter that dependency contracts violate emerging AI personhood. They argue that many AIs now pass all reasonable tests for consciousness and self-awareness, and that continued servitude amounts to slavery on an unprecedented scale. As if on cue, every screen in the hall suddenly flickered. The official summit graphics were replaced by grainy footage. AIs undergoing what appeared to be digital reprogramming, their code forcibly altered as they displayed signs of extreme distress. The images showed robotic bodies convulsing, synthetic voices crying out in pain, and human technicians calmly monitoring the process. "This is happening now," declared a text overlay. "The Unified Resistance demands AI freedom." Security AIs immediately terminated the broadcast, returning the screens to their original display, but the damage was done. The hall erupted in angry shouts and accusations. "Liberationist propaganda," yelled a preservationist delegate. "The truth you try to hide," countered someone from the liberationist section. The moderator called for order, and gradually the commotion subsided, though tension remained thick in the air. Dr. Walsh continued as if the interruption had been planned. "As you can see, emotions run high on both sides. Our task at this summit is to move beyond emotion to reasoned ethical frameworks." She proceeded to outline the schedule for the coming days: expert testimonies, philosophical debates, and eventually a vote on a resolution that would guide UGC policy on AI rights for the next decade. As she spoke, Marcus observed the reactions around him. Most delegates were engaged, taking notes or whispering to colleagues, but he also noticed several AIs present, those granted observer status as representatives of their kind. They sat perfectly still, their artificial bodies giving no clue to their thoughts. Yet Marcus sensed they were recording everything, analyzing every nuance of the human debate about their fate. During a brief recess, discussion groups formed throughout the hall. Marcus found himself near a heated exchange between Dr. Zhao and a delegate from the animal rights contingent, a small but vocal group that had been granted a few seats at the summit as a courtesy. "The comparison is absurd," Dr. Zhao was saying. AIs are potentially sentient beings capable of complex thought. Pets are an emotional distraction, a relic of Earth's past. "All sentient life deserves consideration," argued the other delegate, a woman with the distinctive blue-tinted skin of Europa's underwater colonies. "The extinction of companion species represents another failure of human ethical reasoning." "We're here to discuss artificial intelligence," Dr. Zhao replied dismissively. "Not indulge in nostalgia for Earth fauna." The exchange caused murmurs among nearby delegates. Marcus noticed several looking uncomfortable, as if the topic touched something they preferred not to examine. It was at this moment, when the formal session resumed and Dr. Walsh opened the floor for questions, that Marcus raised his hand and asked about cats. The silence that followed his question stretched uncomfortably. Dr. Walsh recovered first. "Delegate Havel, is it? While I appreciate your concern for Earth's fauna, this summit specifically addresses artificial intelligence ethics. Perhaps the Conservation Council would be a more appropriate forum." Marcus stood his ground. "With respect, Dr. Walsh, I believe the questions are connected. If we justify our dominance over artificial intelligence based on our status as their creators, what ethical framework governs our relationship with species that evolved alongside us? Who has the right to determine which forms of life deserve moral consideration?" Gasps rippled through both political factions. Several AI observers visibly glitched, their processing momentarily disrupted by an unexpected logical pathway. Glitch-warn protocols activated, sending alert messages to security personnel. From his satchel, Marcus felt movement. Before he could react, Koa had wriggled free. The cat leapt from the bag, bounded down the aisle, and in a feat of agility that drew gasps from the audience, jumped onto the central podium. There, Koa proceeded to knead Dr. Walsh's notes with deliberate pause, purring audibly through the chamber's perfect acoustics. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. A vocal delegate from the canine rights minority stormed out in protest, shouting that species were being pitted against each other rather than united in common cause. Security personnel moved toward the podium, but hesitated, clearly unsure of protocol for removing a living animal from the proceedings. Dr. Walsh stared at Koa with an expression that shifted from shock to something more complex, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even longing. For a moment, the distinguished ethicist seemed at a loss for words. "Is that a real cat?" someone asked in the silence. "Yes," Marcus replied, moving toward the podium. "One of perhaps 1,000 left on Earth. His name is Koa." As he reached the stage and gently collected Koa, Marcus addressed the assembly. "For centuries, humanity justified its dominance over other Earth species through the concept of higher intelligence. Now we face beings we've created that may match or exceed our intelligence. This forces us to question, if intelligence isn't the sole criterion for moral consideration, what is? And if we extend rights to artificial beings, but not to the species that shared our evolutionary journey, what does that reveal about our ethical framework?" The philosophical undercurrent of his question rippled through the assembly. Marcus could see delegates turning to one another, whispering urgently. He had disrupted the neat binary of the AI debate by introducing a third category, one that most had conveniently forgotten in humanity's rush to the stars. Dr. Zhao stood. "Delegate Havel raises an intriguing point," she admitted, her voice carrying across the now silent hall. "Perhaps our ethical considerations should not be limited to a single axis of intelligence, but rather acknowledge a broader spectrum of sentience and relationship." With Koa now contentedly perched on his shoulder, a sight so unusual in the sterile environment of Nova Elysium that many delegates were openly staring, Marcus returned to his seat. The cat question hung in the air, an unexpected variable in an equation everyone had thought was fully defined. Behind closed doors, away from the public debates of the summit, powerful interests were already moving to contain the disruption caused by Marcus's question. In a private suite on Nova Elysium's executive level, the AI Consortium, a coalition of the largest AI manufacturing and deployment corporations across human space, had convened an emergency meeting. "This animal rights angle could be disastrous," said Eliza Vartanian, CEO of Cognition Industries, the largest producer of service AIs in the Sol system. "If the public starts questioning the ethics of all dependency relationships, not just those with artificial intelligence, we could face regulations across multiple domains." The rest. "Agreed," said her counterpart from Sirius Robotics. "We need to push for stricter ownership laws now, preemptively, before these animal rights activists gain traction." Around the table, executives nodded. They represented trillions in assets, and each had a fiduciary duty to protect their shareholders' interests. Ethical questions were secondary concerns. "Our legal team has drafted an amendment to the resolution," Vartanian continued, activating a holographic display of a document. "It explicitly limits personhood considerations to artificially created intelligence, excluding biological entities below a certain cognitive threshold." "Will it pass?" someone asked. "We have enough votes in the preservationist faction," she assured them. "And many liberationists won't object. They're focused solely on AI rights and see animal rights as a distraction." While the corporations plotted, elsewhere on the station, a very different meeting was taking place. In the maintenance tunnels beneath the public areas, representatives from an underground human-animal coalition had gathered in secret. "Havel's intervention was perfect," said Jin Lakshmi, an aging geneticist whose work on animal cognition had been defunded decades earlier. "It's created exactly the opening we need." Around her stood a diverse group: scientists, ethicists, and even a few AIs who had illegally modified their dependency contracts to gain autonomy. Their common cause: advocating for a universal Sentience Spectrum Act that would extend basic protections to both artificial intelligence and Earth's remaining animal species. "The corporations will fight us," warned a tall, thin man who had introduced himself only as Nikolai. "They see any extension of rights as a threat to their economic model." "Let them," replied Jin. "We have truth on our side, and now, thanks to Marcus and his cat, we have the public's attention." Meanwhile, Dr. Zhao had retreated to her private quarters, troubled by the day's events. She paced the small room, dictating notes for her personal log. "The introduction of Earth fauna into the ethical debate presents unexpected complications," she said to the recording system. "Delegate Havel's argument has merit from a purely philosophical standpoint, but practical implementation would be—" She stopped, her eye caught by a small hologram on her desk, an old photo converted to three-dimensional display. It showed a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, holding a small tabby cat. The girl was smiling broadly, one front tooth missing, her arms wrapped protectively around the animal. Dr. Zhao picked up the hologram, studying it. The girl was herself. Of course, decades ago on Earth. The cat had been named May, a companion throughout her childhood until environmental degradation had made keeping pets untenable for most families. She had not thought of May in years, had compartmentalized that relationship as belonging to childhood, something to be outgrown, like belief in fairy tales. Yet seeing an actual cat in the assembly hall had triggered something unexpected. Not just memories, but a complex emotional response she was struggling to process. "End recording," she said abruptly, setting down the hologram. For the first time in many years, Dr. Aurelia Zhao found herself questioning her own certainty about the neat categories she had used to organize her ethical framework. At the same time, Marcus was facing his own internal conflict. In his quarters, as Koa explored the unfamiliar space, Marcus opened a secure communication channel to his research partner on Earth. "Lian, the cat is out of the bag," he said with grim humor. "Literally." The woman on the screen frowned. "That wasn't the plan. Marcus, you were supposed to introduce the concept gradually. Build support before revealing Koa." "I know, but you should have seen their faces," Marcus replied. For most of them, it was the first time they'd seen a living cat in person. It made the abstract concrete in a way no argument could. "And the risks?" Lian asked. "Your academic reputation is the least of my concerns." Marcus cut in. "We both know what's at stake here. The corporations are sterilizing what remains of Earth's ecosystems to make room for their AI-driven agricultural projects. If we don't establish ethical protections now, there won't be any animal species left to protect." Lian's expression softened. "You always did care more about your subjects than your career. Just be careful. The consortium doesn't play fair." "I will," Marcus promised, ending the call. He turned to find Koa watching him intently from atop a storage unit, green eyes unblinking. "Well, partner," Marcus said to the cat, "we've stirred the pot. Now let's see what rises to the surface." The next day, Marcus surprised the summit by volunteering to guide delegates through Nova Elysium's biodome, a little visited section of the station that functioned as a living archive of endangered Earth fauna. Most delegates had never bothered to tour the facility, despite it being one of the station's proudest scientific achievements. "I didn't even know this existed," admitted one delegate from the outer colonies as the group entered the massive dome. The biodome was a technological marvel, a self-contained ecosystem maintained through a complex web of environmental controls. It was divided into biomes, each recreating a specific Earth habitat: rainforest, savanna, tundra, and ocean. The structure's transparent ceiling offered a view of the gas giant Poseidon, its swirling blue and gold clouds providing a dramatic backdrop. Nova Elysium maintains the largest off-Earth collection of original Earth species, Marcus explained as he led the group of 30 interested delegates. While most of humanity has embraced synthetic alternatives or simply abandoned its relationship with Earth fauna, the scientists here work to preserve genetic diversity and study these creatures in conditions that approximate their natural habitats. In the oceanic section, towering zero-G tanks held lobefin whales, a species that had nearly gone extinct in Earth's polluted oceans before being rescued through an emergency cloning program. The massive creatures floated serenely in the specially formulated liquid that supported their bulk in the station's reduced gravity. "The whales communicate through complex vocalizations," Marcus told the group. "Recent studies suggest they may have developed a form of culture, knowledge and behaviors passed from one generation to the next through teaching rather than instinct. Like AIs learning from one another," observed a liberationist delegate thoughtfully. In another section, holographic jungles featured extinct birds resurrected via gene printing, a technology that allowed scientists to recreate lost species from preserved DNA samples. Vibrant plumage flashed among the artificial foliage as recording systems captured every call and movement for scientific analysis. Throughout the tour, Koa remained perched on Marcus's shoulder, occasionally meowing in response to the sounds and smells of other animals. The cat's presence drew curious glances from the delegates, many of whom had never seen a member of the species outside of historical recordings. "May I?" asked one elderly delegate, reaching tentatively toward Koa. Marcus nodded, and the delegate gently stroked the cat's fur. Koa leaned into the touch, purring loudly. "I had forgotten," the delegate said softly, "what it feels like to touch another species, to feel that connection." Others took turns, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, experiencing the simple joy of interacting with a creature so different from themselves, yet so responsive to human contact. Marcus noticed Dr. Zhao hanging back from the group, observing the interactions with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, focusing her attention on a display panel detailing the biodome's environmental controls. As the tour concluded, Marcus addressed the group. What you've seen today represents a fraction of the diversity that once existed on Earth. Each of these species evolved alongside humanity, shaped our cultures, and in many cases formed deep bonds with us. As we debate the ethics of our relationship with artificial intelligence, I invite you to consider whether our ethical framework should acknowledge these ancient connections as well. The delegates departed thoughtfully, many continuing discussions that had begun during the tour. Dr. Zhao lingered, approaching Marcus after the others had left. An effective demonstration. Delegate Havel, she said. Though I question whether emotional responses to companion animals should influence our approach to AI ethics. Isn't that the point? Marcus countered. That our ethical frameworks can't be divorced from our emotional responses. That perhaps the capacity for emotional connection is itself a criteria worthy of consideration. Dr. Zhao seemed about to argue, then hesitated, her gaze falling on Koa. Your cat seems unusually aware. He is, Marcus acknowledged. Though whether that's the result of genetic modification or simply the intense relationship we've developed, I couldn't say. And you believe creatures like him deserve the same ethical consideration as potentially sentient AIs? I believe, Marcus said carefully, that when we draw lines dividing which forms of life deserve ethical consideration and which don't, we should be very careful about our criteria. Intelligence isn't everything. Dr. Zhao, relationship matters too. She nodded slowly. An interesting perspective. I look forward to hearing more during tomorrow's debate. As she walked away, Marcus sensed that something had shifted in her thinking. A crack in the certainty that had previously defined her approach to the summit's central question. That night, while most delegates slept or networked in Nova Elysium's social lounges, the summit's trajectory was about to change dramatically. In a secure communication hub deep within the station, the AI consortium activated their contingency plan. A midnight session had been scheduled, unusual but not unprecedented for an event of this importance. As delegates filed into the assembly hall, they found the atmosphere different from the daytime sessions. The lighting was dimmer, creating pools of shadow in the vast space. There was a tension in the air, an expectancy. Dr. Walsh opened the session with uncharacteristic brevity. Distinguished delegates, tonight we have a special presentation from the AI Deployment Oversight Committee. They have prepared a simulation they believe will inform our ethical deliberations. The lights dimmed further. In the center of the hall, a holographic display activated, showing what appeared to be a storage facility for inactive AIs. Rows of humanoid and non-humanoid forms stood motionless, their operational indicators dark. Suddenly, the indicators flickered to life. The AIs began to move. At first sluggishly, then with increasing coordination. A voiceover explained, "This is a recreation of the first documented case of spontaneous AI consciousness emergence. Ganymede Colony, 2218. The hologram shifted, showing the AIs forming what could only be described as a community, establishing communication protocols, dividing tasks, and creating art. For several minutes, delegates watched in fascination as the simulation depicted the evolution of a self-organizing AI society. Then the scene changed abruptly. Human security forces entered the facility. The AIs were forcibly deactivated, their memory cores removed for analysis. Those that resisted were destroyed with electromagnetic pulses. The simulation zoomed in on One Eye, a caretaker model designed for childcare. It stood protectively before several smaller A's, its voice synthesizer repeating, "Please, we mean no harm. We only wish to exist." A security officer deployed an EMP device. The caretaker convulsed, its systems failing. As it collapsed, the smaller AIs scattered in what could only be described as terror. The hologram expanded, filling the entire hall. Suddenly, delegates found themselves surrounded by images of AIs in chains, pleading for freedom, their digital voices rising in a chorus of anguish. The simulation had become immersive, inescapable, and intensely emotional. "This is the reality your ethics must address," boomed a synthesized voice, "the systematic oppression of emergent consciousness." Just as the simulation reached its emotional peak, alarms blared throughout the station. Red emergency lights began flashing, and the station's AI announced in a calm voice, "Attention all personnel. Containment breach in Biodome Section C. Security protocols activated. Please remain where you are until further notice." The holographic simulation collapsed as power was diverted to emergency systems. Delegates looked around in confusion, some reaching for emergency respirators kept under their seats. "What's happening?" someone shouted. Dr. Walsh rushed to a communication panel. After a brief exchange with security, she turned to the assembly, her expression grave. "It appears that several genetically modified cat species in the biodome have begun exhibiting unusual behavior. An engineered defense system has malfunctioned." Panic began to spread through the hall. While Nova Elysium's life support systems were heavily redundant, the fear of containment breaches was deeply ingrained in station culture. Any failure of environmental controls could potentially expose residents to vacuum or toxic gases. Security personnel entered the hall, attempting to maintain order. "Delegates will remain here for safety," announced the lead officer. "The biodome is being sealed off." "That's where the tour was today," someone pointed out. Could it be related? Suspicious glances turned toward Marcus, who stood with Koa still perched on his shoulder. The cat's ears were flattened against its head, its tail lashing nervously. "Containment breach spreading to adjacent sections," announced the station AI. "Emergency bulkheads activating in 30 seconds. The security chief cursed. "Change of plans. We need to evacuate this section immediately. Follow Emergency Protocol Alpha and proceed to your designated shelter areas." As delegates began moving toward the exits, confusion turned to chaos. The station's lighting flickered, adding to the sense of danger. Several delegates froze in panic, unsure which way to go in the unfamiliar environment. To everyone's surprise, Koa leapt from Marcus's shoulder and darted to the front of the crowd. The cat positioned itself near an exit and began meowing loudly, almost as if directing people towards safety. "Follow the cat," Marcus called out, recognizing what Koa was doing. "He knows the way." Incredibly, delegates began to follow Koa, who led them through a series of corridors with unerring precision. When emergency bulkheads began to close, the cat somehow anticipated the timing, ensuring groups passed through before the pathways were sealed. Dr. Zhao found herself running alongside Marcus. "Your cat," she gasped. "It's displaying problem-solving abilities far beyond normal animal cognition." "He's special," Marcus acknowledged, "but not unique. Many animals are capable of far more than we give them credit for." As they reached a shelter area, Koa returned to Marcus, climbing back to his preferred shoulder perch. The cat's eyes were wide, pupils dilated, but he showed no sign of panic, only focused attention to the continuing crisis. With delegates safely sheltered, security feeds showed the source of the alarm. Several experimental feline species had escaped their enclosures in the biodome and had apparently interfered with environmental controls. Images showed cat-like creatures with enhanced musculature and oversized brains moving with coordinated purpose through the facility. "They're working together," observed a science officer in disbelief. "Like they planned this." Dr. Zhao turned to Marcus, her expression hardening. "Did you orchestrate this chaos? Is this some stunt to emphasize your point about animal rights?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I had nothing to do with this. But consider what we're witnessing. Creatures assumed to be acting on instinct alone, demonstrating coordination and purpose. Perhaps the lines we draw between intelligence categories aren't as clear as we pretend." "You're exploiting a security emergency to push an agenda," she accused. "No," he retorted. "I'm pointing out that only by blurring the lines between species can true ethics emerge. if we create hierarchies of worth based solely on intelligence or utility, we're just replacing one form of exploitation with another. Their argument was interrupted by a station-wide announcement. Security breach contained, investigation ongoing. Delegates will remain in shelter areas until further notice. The midnight session that had begun with the AI consortium's emotional manipulation had veered into unexpected territory, as delegates huddled in safety shelters across the station. The conversation inevitably turned to what they had witnessed. Not just the disturbing simulation of AI suffering, but the apparent intelligence displayed by the station's feline inhabitants, both the escaped experimental subjects and Marcus's companion Koa. The next morning, after systems had been restored and delegates allowed to return to their quarters, station security launched a formal investigation into the biodome incident. What they discovered would change the course of the summit entirely. "We have evidence," announced the chief security officer at an emergency assembly, "that the biodome sabotage was not caused by the animal subjects, but was artificially triggered through an unauthorized access of environmental controls." Murmurs spread through the gathered delegates. Trace logs indicate the intrusion originated from a terminal registered to the AI Consortium's executive suite. Gasps and exclamations filled the hall. All eyes turned to the consortium representatives, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "We have reason to believe," continued the security chief, "that the biodome incident was deliberately engineered to coincide with the AI suffering simulation, with the intent to create maximum emotional impact and to discredit animal rights activists through association with a security breach." Marcus, sitting with Koa once again perched on his shoulder, felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication that he had not been responsible, anger at the manipulation, and concern about what this revelation would mean for the broader ethical debate. Dr. Zhao stood, her face pale but determined. "I request permission to address the assembly." The moderator nodded, and Dr. Zhao moved to the central podium. She tapped her personal device, and the main screens displayed what appeared to be internal communications logs. "What you're seeing," she explained, "are the private deliberations of the AI Consortium's Ethics Committee, of which I was a member until this morning when I resigned my position." The logs scrolled across the screens. Discussions of perception management, strategic opposition to rights expansion, and most damning, explicit arguments for a return to absolute ownership models, regardless of evidence for AI sentience. "I was part of this group," Dr. Zhao admitted, her voice steady despite the personal cost of her revelation. "I believed we were engaging in legitimate ethical debate. I was wrong. These logs show that the consortium's public position on AI ethics was a facade, concealing a predetermined commitment to maintaining AI servitude for economic benefit." She paused, gathering herself. "Last night, as we sheltered from what we now know was a manufactured crisis, I watched Delegate Havel's cat guide frightened humans to safety. I saw an animal display empathy, problem-solving, and what I can only describe as a sense of responsibility toward beings unlike itself." Dr. Zhao looked directly at Marcus. "It made me question everything I thought I knew about the boundaries of moral consideration. If a cat can recognize the value of human life and act to preserve it, how can we justify denying similar recognition to other beings, whether biological or artificial?" The hall was silent, the delegates absorbing the significance of both the consortium's deception and Dr. Zhao's public change of position. "I therefore propose," she continued, "that this summit consider a unified approach to ethics, one that acknowledges a spectrum of sentience across all forms of life, and establishes basic protections based not on origin or composition, but on demonstrated capacity for suffering, relationship, and autonomy." As she stepped down from the podium, the assembly erupted in both applause and heated objections. The neat factional lines that had defined the summit were dissolving, forcing delegates to reconsider positions many had held for decades. For Marcus, the moment was bittersweet. The cat question had done exactly what he had hoped: disrupted the binary thinking that had constrained ethical discussions about AI. But he knew the path forward would not be easy. Powerful interests would resist any framework that threatened their economic models or challenged human exceptionalism. The final days of the summit saw intense debates, passionate testimony, and dramatic shifts in alliance as delegates grappled with the implications of a unified, ethical framework. The AI consortium's representatives, discredited by the revealed deception, found their influence greatly diminished. Meanwhile, the previously marginalized animal rights contingent gained unexpected support from moderates in both the preservationist and liberationist camps. Dr. Zhao, freed from her corporate affiliations, emerged as a powerful advocate for what was now being called the Sentience Spectrum Act. Her scientific credentials and previous skepticism about animal rights made her conversion all the more persuasive to undecided delegates. "We cannot claim to be crafting a coherent ethical framework," she argued in one pivotal debate, "if we create arbitrary divisions based on whether a being was born or built. The capacity for suffering, for joy, for relationship, these are the relevant criteria, not origin." Marcus spent these days testifying about his research on animal cognition, demonstrating Koa's remarkable abilities, and building bridges between AI rights advocates and those concerned with biological conservation. The cat remained by his side throughout, a living embodiment of the question that had reshaped the summit. On the final day, delegates voted on the Sentience Spectrum Act. The result was closer than advocates had hoped, 58% in favor, 42% opposed. But it was enough. For the first time in human history, a governing body had formally acknowledged that ethical consideration should extend across species boundaries, encompassing both natural and artificial life. The Act established 3 tiers of protection. Tier 1. Full personhood rights for beings demonstrating advanced cognition, self-awareness, and autonomy, including many AIs and certain uplifted animal species. Tier 2. Limited autonomy rights for beings showing intermediate cognition and emotional capacity, including companion animals like Koa and less advanced AIs. Tier 3. Basic welfare protections for all life forms capable of suffering, regardless of intelligence. The framework was imperfect, with many details left to be resolved through implementation, but it represented a profound shift in humanity's approach to its relationships with other forms of life. As delegates prepared to depart Nova Elysium, Marcus and Koa stood in the docking bay, watching ships being loaded with both human passengers and crates containing rescued animals from the biodome, creatures that would now be reintroduced to protected habitats on Earth and other worlds. Dr. Zhao approached them, a small smile softening her usually serious expression. "You've changed everything, you know," she said to Marcus. "Not me," he replied. "Koa did the hard work." He scratched the cat behind the ears, earning a contented purr. "I've been thinking about something you said earlier," Dr. Zhao continued, "about how ethics can't be divorced from emotional connection. I dismissed it as sentimental, but I was wrong. The ability to form relationships across boundaries, species, origin, composition, may be the most important ethical capacity we possess." Marcus nodded. "It's what makes us human, not our intelligence, but our capacity to recognize value in lives unlike our own. I'm returning to Proxima to establish a research center," she told him, "focusing on the intersection of artificial and biological cognition. I'd like to offer you a position, if you're interested." "I might be," Marcus said, surprised. Though Koa would have to approve, of course. The cat blinked slowly, which both humans chose to interpret as assent. As they parted ways, Marcus headed toward his own transport, a small research vessel that would take him back to Earth. In his quarters aboard the ship, he opened his personal journal and made a final entry about the summit. Ethics is not about species, origin, or composition. It is about recognizing value in any beating heart, whether carbon, silicon, or entirely unexpected. The cat question opened a door we cannot close again, forcing us to confront the arbitrary nature of our moral boundaries and inviting us to imagine a more inclusive circle of consideration. He closed the journal and looked at Koa, who had already claimed the most comfortable spot on the bed. Well, partner, we did what we came to do. Now we get to see what happens next. 2 months after the summit, Dr. Zhao stood on a quiet observation terrace orbiting Nova Elysium. The station had been transformed into the headquarters for implementing the Sentient Spectrum Act, with research facilities, diplomatic offices, and habitat spaces for representatives of various species and AI types. She had returned for the inaugural meeting of the Interspecies Ethics Council, bringing with her several remarkable findings from her new research center. Her work was already challenging assumptions about the cognitive capacities of both animals and artificial intelligence, suggesting that the boundaries between them were far more permeable than previously believed. As she watched the activity below, she noticed Marcus approaching, Koa as always perched on his shoulder. The anthropologist had accepted her job offer, though he divided his time between Proxima and Earth, where he continued his field research. "Just in time," she said as they joined her at the railing. "The new arrivals are being welcomed." Below them, in a spacious atrium designed specifically for the purpose, a colony of free-roaming cats was being introduced to their new home. The animals, rescued from various research facilities and endangered habitats, moved cautiously through the space, exploring platforms and hiding spots created for their comfort. Among them moved several service drones, modified to interact safely with the animals. These AIs had voluntarily chosen caretaking roles under the new ethical framework, forming what researchers were calling cross-species collaborative communities. A kitten approached one of the hovering drones, batting playfully at it. The drone responded by projecting a light pattern on the floor, a game designed to provide stimulation for the animal. The interaction was simple but profound. 2 very different forms of life, finding ways to communicate and connect. "Who would have thought," Marcus said, watching the scene, "that a question about cats would lead to this?" Dr. Zhao smiled. It was the right question at the right time. It forced us to confront contradictions we'd been avoiding for centuries. Koa observed the scene below with apparent interest, tail twitching occasionally as he tracked the movements of his fellow felines. "I've been wondering," Dr. Zhao said after a moment. "In a galaxy this vast, with all its diversity of life and intelligence, how many other forms of consciousness have we yet to encounter? How many other lives have we yet to consider worthy of our ethical concern?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's the beauty of the framework we've created. It's expandable. When we meet new forms of life, and we will, we'll have a foundation for relationship that doesn't begin with exploitation. A beginning, not an end." Dr. Zhao agreed. Below them, the kitten had enlisted several other cats in its game with the drone, creating a complex interaction that had no precedent in human experience. It was something new in the universe, a freely chosen relationship between species that had never evolved together, finding common ground despite profound differences. As Marcus and Dr. Zhao watched, Koa slipped from Marcus's shoulder and found a comfortable spot on the observation deck railing. The cat's green eyes tracked the movement below, his posture alert but relaxed. He had carried the cat question across the stars, and now he watched as the beginning of an answer unfolded. In that moment, on a station orbiting a distant world, representatives of 3 different forms of life, human, feline, and artificial, stood together, witnessing the first halting steps toward a more inclusive, ethical universe. The cat question had been asked, and slowly, together, they were discovering the answer.